Everyone in the room went quiet when the lawyer cleared his throat. Papers rustled, eyes shifted, and I could feel every breath in the air turn heavy. My ex-husband's family sat across from me, polished, impatient, already thinking about what they'd spend the money on. When the lawyer finally spoke my name, I straightened up, holding on to the last bit of hope I had. But what came next made the whole room erupt in whispers. "To my former wife," he read, pausing as if the words weighed more than they should. "I leave $1. A stunned silence followed. My sister-in-law's smirk, my son's quiet stare, the lawyer's uneasy glance, it all blurred together. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the kind that slips out when your heart gives up trying to understand. $1. After 10 years of marriage. After standing by him through bankruptcy, rebuilding the farm, the sickness that nearly took him, that was what I was worth. A single, wrinkled dollar. The lawyer shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking to the last page of the will before he quickly closed it. Something about his face changed, the kind of look people wear when they're holding back more than they're saying. I noticed, but I didn't ask. Not then. By the time I walked out, the others were already celebrating their shares, land, cars, the house by the lake. I had nothing but that $1 folded neatly in my hand. But later that night, as the house grew quiet and the weight of the day sank in, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, "I need to see you tomorrow. There's something your husband left, just for you." The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the kitchen window, steady and cold, as if trying to remind me that some storms don't end overnight. I sat at the table, the $1 bill still lying there beside my coffee cup. I kept staring at it, torn edges, faded ink, meaningless and yet impossible to ignore. What could the lawyer possibly want to see me for? Maybe it was another cruel twist, a missing signature, or a final piece of humiliation my ex had planned before he died. When I pulled into the law office, the parking lot was empty. The place looked different in daylight, smaller, quieter, almost secretive. Inside, the lawyer greeted me with a polite smile, but his eyes told another story. He gestured for me to sit. No paperwork this time. No formal tone. Just him, and that same worn briefcase he'd had yesterday. He set it on the table and opened it slowly, pulling out a small manila envelope sealed with red wax. "This," he said softly, sliding it toward me, "was left with very specific instructions. It wasn't part of the will." My fingers hesitated over the seal. I looked up at him, but he just nodded. I peeled it open carefully and pulled out a single sheet of folded paper and a small brass key attached to a tag. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. I unfolded it, and my breath caught. It was his handwriting. My ex-husband's. Asterisk, if you're reading this. Asterisk, it began. Asterisk, then you've already laughed at the dollar. Good. I hoped you would. You never cared about the money. That's why this is for you. There's something I couldn't explain, something I had to keep quiet about. It's time you knew the truth. Take the lawyer. He knows where to go. The key will make sense when you see it. Asterisk, the rest of the page was blank. My pulse quickened as I turned the key over in my hand. It was old, heavy, ornate, the kind you'd see in antique trunks or forgotten doors. The tag tied to it was yellowed with age, and on it, in faded ink, was a single word, asterisk Harper. Asterisk, I looked at the lawyer, confused. Harper, what does that mean? He hesitated before answering. Harper Lane. About an hour from here. Your husband asked me to take you there myself. The drive was silent for the most part, the tires cutting through puddles as the countryside blurred by. Every few miles, the lawyer would glance at me, as if debating whether to say something. I wanted to ask questions. I had 1,000 of them, but none made it past my lips. All I could think about was that key and the strange feeling it gave me when I held it. It wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to anticipation, the kind that sits deep in your chest and won't let go. When we turned onto Harper Lane, the world seemed to quiet. The road was narrow, lined with trees that arched overhead like they'd been guarding the path for years. Mist clung to the ground, swirling around the tires as the car slowed to a stop in front of a wrought iron gate. The metal was rusted, the hinges worn, but beyond it stood a house, large, weathered, and eerily familiar. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the gravel. The air smelled like rain and pine. The lawyer walked beside me, holding an umbrella, but I barely noticed. My focus was on the gate. There, hanging from the lock, was an identical brass plate to the one on my key. It fit perfectly. When the gate creaked open, a chill ran through me. The path leading up to the house was lined with overgrown grass and patches of ivy climbing up the stone walls. Windows were boarded in places, yet somehow, the house didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of wood polish. Old furniture sat beneath white sheets. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing through the hall. On a small table near the staircase, I noticed a framed photo, the two of us, years ago, before everything fell apart. I hadn't seen that picture in over a decade. "He left this place to you," the lawyer said quietly. "It's not listed in any of his records. No one else knows it exists." My hand brushed the banister, smooth and cold beneath my fingers. "Why?" I whispered, more to myself than him. He shook his head. "All he said was that you'd understand when you came here." In the parlor, there was another envelope, placed neatly on the mantel. My name was written across it. I hesitated, then tore it open. "I built this place before the divorce. I never showed it to you because I wanted it to be finished first. I wanted it to be a home again, not a memory of what we lost. If you're here, it means I ran out of time. But I left everything you need inside. Don't sell it. Don't walk away. Just look around, and you'll see why." My throat tightened as I read his words. The lawyer stood quietly, giving me space. I folded the letter, my hands trembling. Something about the house, the smell, the air, the quiet, it all felt like him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt haunted, but not in a bad way. I turned back toward the hall, the key still warm in my palm. Somewhere in this house was the reason he'd left me that $1, the start of a truth I hadn't yet begun to uncover. The floorboards creaked as I walked deeper into the house, each step stirring up the smell of old wood and something faintly sweet, like cedar and dust. The lawyer followed behind me but didn't speak. It was as if he knew this part wasn't his to interrupt. The letter in my hand felt heavier with every word I reread. Just look around, and you'll see why. What was I supposed to be looking for? The house was bigger than I expected, and despite the years of silence, it still held traces of life. A cup sat on the kitchen counter, faintly stained with coffee. A jacket hung by the door, just where someone might have left it after a long day. It felt impossible, like time had stopped here the moment he'd walked out of it. When I reached the back hallway, I noticed a narrow door partly hidden behind a tall grandfather clock. I pushed it open and found a set of stairs leading down, steep and narrow. The air that drifted up was cooler, damp, like the earth after a storm. I hesitated, but something about the quiet pull of that place urged me forward. The lawyer stayed at the top, watching as I descended slowly into the dark. The basement wasn't empty. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, its pull string swaying slightly as if someone had just been there. When I tugged it, the bulb flickered to life, revealing the space in soft yellow light. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old wooden boxes, jars, and papers, but in the center of the room stood something unexpected, a heavy wooden chest. I moved closer. Dust blanketed its surface, but beneath it, carved into the lid, were initials, *L.M.L. My breath caught. My name. I sank to my knees and brushed the dust away, my fingers trembling. The chest wasn't locked, just latched. I lifted the lid slowly, half afraid of what I might find inside. Inside, wrapped in soft linen, were rows of photographs, letters, and keepsakes, things I hadn't seen in years. There were pictures of us on our wedding day, of our son when he was little, of the old house before we lost it. I hadn't even known these photos still existed. Underneath them was a small leather notebook. I opened it carefully, and his handwriting filled the pages, uneven, hurried, but unmistakably his. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. If she ever finds this, tell her I never meant for it to end the way it did. I didn't leave her nothing. I left her everything I had. I just couldn't let them take it. My hands froze. He was talking about his family, the same ones who'd sat in that office yesterday with their greedy smiles. I flipped through the next pages. Each one was filled with notes about the property, how he'd built it quietly under a different name, how he'd transferred it in secret to keep it hidden from lawsuits and debts. The house wasn't just a gift. It was protection. He'd known what was coming long before I did. At the bottom of the chest, tucked beneath the last page of the journal, I found an envelope labeled * Final Instructions. * I tore it open, my heart pounding. * Go to the greenhouse behind the house. It's where I started this. It's where you'll understand. * I stood, clutching the note. The lawyer had followed me halfway down the stairs now, his voice low. Are you all right? I nodded, though my throat was tight. He built this for me, I whispered. Outside, the storm clouds had broken, and pale light filtered through the trees. I stepped through the back door, the wet grass cool beneath my shoes. The greenhouse stood at the far edge of the yard, a skeleton of glass and metal, overgrown with vines. As I approached, I could see condensation on the panels, as if something inside was still breathing. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The air inside was humid and heavy with the scent of soil. Sunlight cut through the cracks in the glass, scattering across rows of plants, some alive, some long dead. And at the center, covered in a white sheet, was something large, the shape of a table or a workbench. I lifted the sheet. Beneath it was a wooden model, a miniature version of the estate itself, every detail carved by hand. But what stopped me was the tiny brass keyhole on the model's front door. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the key I'd carried since yesterday. My fingers shook as I slid it in and turned. A small drawer popped open, and inside was another envelope. This one was different, cleaner, newer. My name was written on it again. * You're standing in what I couldn't finish. The house, the land, the quiet, it's all yours now. You spent years holding everything together while I fell apart. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, but if you can find peace here, then I've done something right. The dollar wasn't an insult. It was a message that what we built together was never about money. It was about love that lasted longer than we did. * The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest, surrounded by the soft hum of wind against glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel bitterness, just the weight of something real, something pure. I turned back toward the house, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, steady and familiar, saying the thing he always said whenever life got too hard. * Home isn't where you live. It's what you carry with you. * I stood in the middle of the greenhouse long after the light began to fade, my hand still clutching the letter. The air had gone still again, heavy with that earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and something deeper, something that felt like memory. The lawyer had gone back to the car to give me time, but I couldn't move yet. Every part of me wanted to understand what all of this meant. The hidden house, the letters, the model. It was as if my ex-husband had built an entire story he never told anyone, one I was only now stepping into. The sun had dipped low, turning the glass walls into panels of amber and gold. Dust floated through the beams of light like tiny ghosts. I looked around, trying to make sense of the space. In one corner stood an old wooden workbench covered with tools, jars, and sketches. The drawings were carefully pinned to a corkboard above it, blueprints of renovations, garden layouts, even a floor plan for the mansion itself. Every note, every measurement, was in his handwriting. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail. But then I noticed something odd. Near the edge of the table was a small, locked metal box, half buried under stacks of yellowed papers. It was plain and heavy, about the size of a lunch tin, with no markings except a single etched word on the lid, * after. My heart skipped. The brass key I'd used earlier was still warm in my hand, and though it looked too old to fit, something told me to try. The lock resisted for a moment before clicking open with a soft snap. Inside was a bundle of letters bound with string. The paper was newer than the others, the ink darker, like they'd been written in the last few years. The first envelope had my name again. I tore it open carefully. * You'll think this is strange, but I needed you to find it this way, * it began. * When I left, I wasn't running from you. I was trying to finish what I'd started. I built this place with my own hands, hoping one day you'd see what it meant. The lawyers, the family, they only ever saw what could be divided. But what we made, what we lived, that was never something to split apart. You were my anchor, even when I drifted too far. * I read the lines over and over until they blurred. My breath hitched as I reached the end of the letter, where a smaller note was tucked inside. * If you want to know the rest, Go to the attic. The house loomed behind me in the dim evening light, its windows glowing faintly in the reflection of the setting sun. For a moment, I hesitated, part of me afraid of what else I might find. But curiosity had already won. Inside, the house felt different. The air seemed lighter, like the walls had been holding their breath all this time. I climbed the staircase, each step creaking softly beneath my feet. The attic door was small, tucked behind a faded curtain at the end of the hall. When I pushed it open, a gust of cool air brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of cedar and dust. The attic was cluttered but organized, filled with old trunks and furniture covered in sheets. I turned on the small lamp hanging from the ceiling, its light dim but warm. There, in the center of the room, stood another wooden chest, larger than the one in the basement. This one wasn't carved with initials, but a simple phrase painted across the front, * for when she's ready. *. I knelt in front of it, heart pounding. The latch opened easily. Inside, I found a collection of photo albums, documents, and something that made my breath catch, a set of legal papers. Property deeds, ownership transfers, all with my name listed as the sole beneficiary. The mansion, the land, even the trust fund attached to it, it all belonged to me. He'd hidden everything to protect it, to make sure no one could take it away. But tucked between the papers was something else, a single Polaroid. It showed the two of us standing in front of this very house years ago, before we'd ever married. I was laughing, holding a paintbrush, my hand streaked with white. He was beside me, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. On the back, in his handwriting, were 3 words, * we almost made it. * I sat back, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. This house wasn't a secret meant to hide his mistakes. It was a message, his way of showing that somewhere, under the mess of our marriage and all the bitterness that came after, he had still loved me enough to build a future in silence. The sound of rain returned, faint at first, tapping gently against the roof. The house creaked softly, as if settling. I closed the chest, my hands lingering on the lid, the weight of the moment pressing into my chest. Downstairs, the lights flickered once, then steadied. I could hear the lawyer moving around, probably wondering what was taking me so long. But I couldn't leave yet. I stood in that attic surrounded by the past and realized something that made my throat tighten. He hadn't left me with $1 out of cruelty. He'd left it as a clue, one final breadcrumb leading me to everything he couldn't say while he was alive. The mansion wasn't just an inheritance. It was a confession. And standing there beneath the soft hum of the rain, I felt the echo of his voice again, steady, quiet, and heartbreakingly familiar. The storm rolled in again that night, thick clouds swallowing the moon until the whole estate sat under a shroud of darkness. The lawyer had gone, leaving me with the documents, the letters, and the silence that filled every inch of the house. I tried to sleep in one of the upstairs rooms, but the rain against the windows was relentless, echoing through the hallways like footsteps that wouldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his handwriting again. The words * for when she's ready * burned into my mind. At some point after midnight, I gave up on sleep and wandered back downstairs. The mansion felt different in the dark, alive in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, and the air had that charged feeling it gets before lightning strikes. I carried a lantern instead of switching on the lights, not because I had to, but because it somehow felt right. The glow flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that twisted and stretched as I walked. I ended up in the parlor again, where the first letter had been waiting. The fire hadn't been lit in years, but the faint scent of smoke still lingered. I ran my hand along the mantel, tracing the edges of an old photograph frame until my fingers caught on something, a thin ridge in the wood. I leaned closer and realized there was a small panel, hidden behind the decorative molding. It took a little pressure, but it clicked open, revealing another envelope. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was marked with 2 initials, *L.M*, my maiden name. My heart skipped. I opened it carefully, afraid the paper might crumble. * by now, you've seen the house. You've found the papers. You know what I tried to build. But there's one last thing I couldn't finish. If you go to the east wing, you'll find a locked door. The key is behind the painting of the river in the hall. What's behind that door is yours, but only if you still believe in what we once dreamed. * I turned slowly toward the hallway, where an old oil painting hung, a landscape of a river cutting through trees, its colors darkened with age. My pulse quickened as I lifted it from the wall. Sure enough, Taped to the back was a small brass key. I could almost hear his voice again, teasing me softly like he used to. Asterisk, you always forget to look closer. Asterisk, the east wing was the oldest part of the house, the floors uneven, the walls marked by water stains and cracks. When I reached the end of the corridor, there it was, a heavy oak door, carved with intricate designs and a keyhole worn smooth by time. The key fit perfectly. The latch clicked open with a low groan, and the door swung inward. The air that greeted me was warm, almost soft. I stepped inside and froze. The room was nothing like the rest of the mansion. It was bright, clean, full of light even in the middle of the storm. Sunlight must have filtered in through skylights I hadn't noticed from outside. The space was filled with paintings, dozens of them, portraits, landscapes, sketches, all lined along the walls and stacked against each other. Every single one was signed with his initials. But they weren't just any paintings. They were us. There I was, sitting in the garden, laughing with our son, standing at the kitchen counter, hair messy and eyes half-tired but smiling. He'd painted moments I'd forgotten, ones I didn't even know he'd noticed. Each brushstroke was careful, deliberate, full of love and regret. I walked slowly through the room, my fingers grazing the frames as tears blurred my vision. In the center of the room stood one unfinished canvas. It showed the two of us standing side by side in front of this very house, only my face was half-sketched, as if he'd never gotten the chance to finish it. On the easel below, a note was pinned with a small piece of string. Asterisk, I couldn't finish this without you. I built the house, but you were always the home. Asterisk, the words hit me harder than anything else he'd left. My knees felt weak as I sat down on the old stool by the easel, staring at the incomplete painting. The sound of the rain outside faded into a steady hum, like the house itself was listening. For years, I'd convinced myself he'd stopped caring the moment our marriage broke apart, but this room told another story. He hadn't stopped loving me. He just didn't know how to say it anymore. I wiped my eyes and looked around the room again. There were more boxes stacked neatly in one corner. Inside, I found sketchbooks filled with rough drawings, plans for renovations, notes about the garden, even recipes he'd written out in his messy handwriting. Every line, every stroke, felt like a piece of him speaking across time. When I finally stood to leave, the storm had begun to ease. I glanced back one last time before closing the door. The paintings glowed faintly in the lantern's light, and for a moment, it looked as though one of the portraits, the one of me smiling in the garden, had moved ever so slightly. Maybe it was just the flicker of the flame, but I could have sworn her expression softened, as if she understood. I stepped into the hall, the brass key still in my hand. The house was silent again, but not the same kind of silence as before. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt awake, alive. I looked down at the key, its metal warm against my palm, and realized what he'd meant all along. The dollar hadn't been a mockery. It was a doorway, a symbol to lead me here, to this moment, to everything he couldn't say in life but left behind for me to find when I was finally ready to listen.